The night is October 1st, 1970, and the sounds of ad hoc demolition echo around Connie Mack Stadium. Fans stormed the field following the Philadelphia Phillies' walk-off victory over the Montreal Expos. Nearly 32,000 packed Connie Mack Stadium that evening, and as the mayhem on the grounds unfolds, the capacity crowd gives this old ballpark a characteristically Philadelphian send-off.
I got to play the last game at Connie Mack. I mean, people were pulling up seats, they were taking whatever they could, they were trying to dig up home plate.
Matter of fact, there was one guy, I'm thinking, he must have been through this before. He was actually selling crowbars.
I swear the press box was shaking. Maybe my memory's not good, but it was frightening. But I was up there. I wasn't down the field or anything like that, or to get to the clubhouse. So we survived.
What are they going to do about this? I mean, the place is being literally torn apart right before our eyes, and I thought, these people are crazy. Then I looked down and saw my two sons down there ripping off a seat. And believe it or not, I still have that seat.
Tapping his other teammates, like, look at this guy, look at that. They were carrying toilets out. I mean, the whole place was being torn apart.
The story of Connie Mack Stadium is the story of a neighborhood, of a city, and of a culture. The ballpark, once the heart of a blue-collar community, has largely been forgotten. By the end of its history, the stadium became a symbol of a divide between the city and its residents. But before its destruction, before the racial tensions of the 60s boiled over into baseball, before the fold became reality, before the A's left the city, before Spite Fence went up, there was one man who made an indelible mark on the history of Philadelphia at the turn of the 20th century. His name was Connie Mack.
And I went up the mezzanine level behind home plate. There was Mr. Mack sitting, and there was another gentleman with him. And I started walking toward him, and the gentleman gave me this. Mr. Mack said, "Come on over." So I went over and I grabbed a piece of paper and I got him to sign an autograph. It took him a long time, but it was beautifully written. Connie Mack.
He could be as tough as rawhide, and as gentle as a mother, reasonable and obstinate beyond reason, and courtly and benevolent and fierce. He was kind-hearted and hard-fisted, drove a close bargain, and was suckered in 100 deals. He was generous and thoughtful, autocratic and shy, and independent, and altogether completely lovable. Red Smith, New York Herald Tribune.
The A's of the 1910s terrorized the American League, winning 3 World Series and becoming beloved by Philadelphia. Nowhere was this more evident than in the neighborhood in North Philly that grew around the ballpark.
If you talk to people who live there, they have a lot of fond memories of it, and all remember it as a very vital, vibrant neighborhood that was kind of defined by its proximity to the ballpark. The people took an awful lot of pride in being in a neighborhood where they were cheek by jowl with major league ball players.
Connie Mack Stadium, then known as Shibe Park, had an extravagant brick facade. Overlooking the entire scene at the main entrance were terracotta busts of manager Connie Mack and owner Ben Shibe. But the display on the field was even more fantastic than the scene outside. With a core anchored by Eddie Plank, Chief Bender, and the $100,000 infield of Stuffy McGinnis, Eddie Collins, Jack Barry, and Home Run Baker, Mack's college boys pummeled the Young American League. At their stadium, they created baseball's first true dynasty, lasting 5 years, from 1909 to 1914. After championships in 1910, 11, and 13, the A's faced the Boston Braves in the 1914 World Series. Boston had been in last place as late as July 18th, but surged in late summer to secure the pennant before sweeping the A's in the World Series. That offseason, the A's lost 4 future Hall of Famers. Eddie Plank, Chief Bender, Home Run Baker, and Eddie Collins. Philadelphia fans were hurt by this. Mack and the A's had given them pride in their community and in their city. To see their stars leave felt like a betrayal. Of the legendary core, dubbed the $100,000 infield, only McGinnis remained.
Piking along with the trailers, here as the summer flits. Sometimes isn't it lonesome, wasting your two-base hits, batting above 300 while hanging on to a dream, swept from the years behind you, last of the old regime. Grantland Rice.
The ballpark sits at 21st and Lehigh. In the early 1900s, this neighborhood was a mixture of first and second generation immigrants, Irish, Italians, Germans, and Jews. They lived in multi-story mansions, middle-class row homes, and immigrant bandbox housing. The houses along North 20th Street were used as overflow bleachers during big games.
They had a block committee which would fix prices, which would pay off the city to allow them to erect grandstands on the roof. They built these grandstands with stairways down to the street. People would put fans in their bathroom, and so they look out the bathroom window. They would have them on the second floor flat roof. They would have them wherever they could push them. People claim they sent their kids to college from the money they would make selling space.
The Irish dominated the culture of the neighborhood, and they loved their countryman Connie Mack, or by his birth name, Cornelius McGillicuddy. Coming from a country on hard times, one Irish resident said of their shabby dwelling, "It's better than thatched roofs." Slowly, wealthier Philadelphians were moving away from the industry and older areas of North Philly as the development of cars and light rail made it easier to get to their jobs. Their working-class neighbors stayed within walking distance of the factories and rail yards where they worked.
Well, the cities, let's face it, they're always changing. They're always evolving. And usually that evolution comes because of the latest wave of either immigrants or people coming up from the South to escape Jim Crow. That's our immigration pattern, African American immigration pattern.
As the century progressed, older meandering roads and highways disappeared, replaced by asphalt and concrete. The lively characteristic of the neighborhood and much of 19th century America was washed away as cars took over the streets from people. The upper class pushed for the Parks movement to give workers a cleaner, morally ambiguous place to congregate now that the wealthy in their automobiles had taken over the streets. One local resident said,
Old Shy moved baseball off our streets into his park. It wasn't all bad. The boys learned how to act in that swanky park and stopped fighting one another in the saloons. They can sort of fight New York instead and show some of the Philadelphia hi-hats that we were okay.
But baseball meant a lot to this area. The Philadelphia Stars played here when the Phillies were on the road or the A's were on the road. Negro League teams played through here.
The A's, of course, weren't the only team in town. 7 blocks away on Broad and Lehigh at a stadium called Baker Bowl were the Philadelphia Phillies, laughingstock of the National League. The Phillies had fewer fans and were the poorer, less successful team. The two ball clubs faced so little direct competition that fans occasionally supported both without feeling disloyal to either. The primary cultural barriers that did exist between the teams were rooted in religious and ethnic divides. The A's found huge support from Catholic Irish Americans and liberals. Down on Broad, the Phillies found their fans among conservative Democrats and Protestants from Germany and England, as well as those who enjoyed rooting for the underdog. The divide between the two clubs deepened as the 1920s pressed on and the Phillies' losses continued. Only once, from 1918 to 48, would they ever finish above 500. Meanwhile, less than a mile away at Shibe Park, Mack's A's were a giant, slowly awakening from a decade-long slumber. Connie Mack was constructing a new dynasty, one to surpass even his old teams. First, there was Al Simmons.
There's Al Simmons, the champion's leading home run slugger at bat. And there goes a long one. It looks like a homer. It looks like a homer. Right over in the left field bleachers.
Jimmy Fox.
This is Jimmy Fox, player who's got the greatest future of anybody in baseball today.
Maybe we'll all have more to say after we play the Cubs.
Lefty Grove.
Let's go over and take a look at Lefty's big fist and see how he holds the old pill when he throws his famous cannonball.
And Mickey Cochran.
Mickey, how do they look to you this year?
Why, they look fine. All our veteran pitchers look just as good as ever. Groves looks to be just as fast. Wahlberg looks fine, and so does Mahaffey.
In 1928, stock prices and trading hit an all-time high. Thousands of Americans bought stocks on margin, paying part of the cost out of pocket and borrowing the rest through brokers. Then during the summer of 1929, construction fell off, inventories piled up, prices, employment, and production declined. On October 24th, there was a massive wave of selling. On October 29th, Black Tuesday, the bottom dropped out and the market crashed.
While Americans would remember October 1929 as the time of the stock market crash, Philadelphians celebrated it as the return of the World Series to their city. On October 8th, the largest outdoor crowd to ever assemble in Center City to that point watched the Philadelphia Bulletin's electric scoreboard and listened to an announcer with a direct wire to the Cubs' Wrigley Field.
The first game of the series was played before President Herbert Hoover. There was one big question as Mack and Chicago manager Joe McCarthy shook hands. Who would be Connie's starting pitcher? He chose Howard Emke, a has-been. The fans were amazed, but Emke struck out 13 Chicago hitters, a new World Series record. The Athletics won the first game with ease.
Connie Mack puts in a guy didn't use all season, an old guy named Howard Emke, with a ball that's slower than slow. Howard Emke strikes out 13 Cubs. They broke their back swinging at a slow ball.
When the PA announcer back in Philadelphia proclaimed Emke's final strikeout to seal the victory, the crowd went wild. The A's won 2 of the next 3 games to take a 3-1 series lead to Monday, October 14th. With 1 out, down 2 runs in the bottom of the 9th inning in Game 5, the A's sparked a 3-run rally, capped by a walk-off double off the right field scoreboard to win the game and the World Series. The crowd erupted.
After 16 years, the World Championship, the applause was sweet to Connie's ears.
Connie Mack was nowhere to be seen in the celebrations. The grand old man of baseball had retreated to his tower office and laid down on his leather couch, fingers pressed to his throbbing temples.
Connie Mack was quoted, he said, "What you want is a team that stays in contention the entire year, but you don't want them to win. So when you start to negotiate contracts and they start talking about what a great season they had, Connie Mack could now say, well, but we didn't win it."
Mack had added to his trophy cabinet with another World Series title in 1930 and again in 1931 with a 3rd consecutive pennant. Yet, attendance declined as the Depression took hold. Mack denied reports that debts forced him to sell players like Grove, Simmons, and Cochran. But when the ball club moved Jimmy Fox to the Boston Red Sox in 1935, Mack finally admitted that his debts did force the sale. That winter, another betrayal came for Philadelphians when A's owner Jack Shibe erected Spite Fence, a 34-foot wall that blocked sightlines from outside the ballpark. He believed that homeowners selling balcony tickets were taking revenue away from the franchise. An ugly mess of corrugated steel spite fence towered over right field and 20th Street. It bothered outfielders, who struggled to play caroms off the wall. It frustrated left-handed hitters, who complained the fence cost them home runs. Most of all, it upset the community beyond right field, who had become accustomed to the income created by selling balcony seats. 2757 North 20th Street resident and block patriarch Bill Miller said, "They took all the golden eggs." The residents of 20th Street never forgot and never forgave Mack, though the fence was not his doing. Three years later, the Phillies moved from crumbling Baker Bowl into Shibe Park. Now the stadium played host to two failing ball clubs. But the Phillies' fortunes changed, while the A's failed to escape the cellar of the American League. They were purchased by DuPont Chemicals patriarch Bob Carpenter Sr., who immediately turned the reins over to his son, Bob Carpenter Jr. The new Phillies owner was rich and had a rooting interest in the club. The Carpenter family transformed the Phillies from a joke into a franchise associated with bare mediocrity. At least they were out of the cellar. In 1946, the Phillies drew 1 million fans to Shibe Park. The A's barely attracted 600,000. The power dynamic was starting to shift. Then, in 1950, the Phillies did the impossible. They finished in first place and won a pennant. Powered by stars Richie Ashburn, Robin Roberts, Kurt Simmons, and Jim Constanti, the Phillies were young, hard-nosed, tenacious, and captured the hearts of the city. On the final day of the season in Brooklyn, Roberts pitched 10 innings to secure the Phillies' first pennant in 35 years.
One ball, two strikes. Now Newcomb is set. In the stretch, delivering. Swinging a fly very, very deep toward left field. Moving back, Abrams. It's a home run! A home run for Dick Sisler! The Phillies lead 4-1. The Phils won the pennant.
The reception that the team received back in Philadelphia was rapturous.
The Phillies won a thrilling ball game, as you know, and you can tell in the background just how excited these Phillies are over winning the pennant in 1950.
Meanwhile, A's fans came only to jeer. They booed injured players off the field and the losing display on the field.
The highlight of my baseball career came in Philadelphia's Connie Mack Stadium when I saw a fan fall out of the upper deck.
Former catcher and broadcaster Bob Uecker once said,
"When he got up and walked away, the crowd booed."
After the Mack family bought control of the A's from the Shibes in 1937, chaos reigned in the front offices as much as on the field.
Golden Jubilee for the grand old man of baseball. Connie Mack, 81 years old, manager of the Philadelphia Athletics, celebrates his 50th year in baseball. The Dean of Baseball Managers has his cake and eats it too.
Connie Mack had 3 sons, Roy and Earl by his first wife, and Connie Jr. by his second wife. Connie Sr. imagined the trio would one day rule the franchise in concert, shepherding in a new era of A's baseball to Philadelphia after he moved on. It was not to be. Roy and Earl formed a power block against Connie Jr., who had allied with the remaining Shibes. Meanwhile, Connie Sr. continued to manage the ball club until 1950, when he finally stepped down. Until then, assistant manager Earl Mack had been helping his father remember his players' names. When Roy and Earl mortgaged Shibe Park to buy out Connie Jr. and the Shibes, the two former partners turned on each other and feuded openly. When Earl and his wife separated, he took up residence in a small suite in the stadium. Roy had the water turned off, so Earl could not bathe or shower. Rumors began that the Macks would sell the franchise. The A's were in the red, Shibe Park had been mortgaged, and the Mack family had few assets. The tides had turned. The Phillies were winners. The A's, unprofitable losers. In 1954, the ball club was sold to Chicago businessman Arnold Johnson. The sale cost barely $3 million, while Phillies owner Bob Carpenter moved in to buy Shibe Park for about $1.7 million. Johnson planned to move the team to St. Louis. Instead, the A's ended up in Kansas City, becoming a de facto farm team for the New York Yankees. It was a tremendous fall from grace for one of the American League's most storied franchises. Businesses shuttered as the patrons that the A's brought to the neighborhood lost their clients. The Phillies hired some of the A's staff, but 53 full-time workers lost their jobs, and 315 part-timers had their wages cut in half. They sat around the stadium, despondent, hopeless. The Philadelphia A's, who had so captured the hearts of the city just over 20 years prior, were no more, and so too was their patriarch. In 1953, Shibe Park was renamed Connie Mack Stadium in honor of the grand old man of baseball. Mack died in 1956. Upon Mack's death, Bob Carpenter was asked if he would change the name of the stadium to Phillies Ballpark. Carpenter said no. The Phillies would continue to play in the stadium of the man with whom they were never affiliated. Mack was a paragon of Philadelphia, not just the A's. But Connie Mack Stadium was rotting. The park was old, the neighborhood was poor, and older white fans were afraid to go to the ballpark. White flight pulled away residents and the A's alike.
Years of growth to this center of defense and industry. Side by side, the houses spread out over the flat valley.
In fact, some of the problem is international because the United States is facing business competition from Germany and Japan. And all of these things means that neighborhoods like Shibe, the one around Shibe Park, all over the United States are deteriorating. As working class people are leaving for jobs which exist maybe in other cities, maybe in the suburbs around Philadelphia, if they still exist in Philadelphia at all. And that change has an impact on the park. I mean, the park gets to be run down, the neighborhood around it gets to be run down.
But the amenities and the parking at Shibe Park was terrible. You know, there was one parking lot on 20th, 21st Street. The rest of the time you parked in the street somewhere and you had kids come up to your car and say, for 50 cents, I'll watch your car. You gave them 50 cents and they left. They weren't watching your car, but that was part of the way you went to the ball game.
White flight was the large-scale migration of mostly Caucasian white-collar workers away from the cities and into the suburbs. The people who took their place in the neighborhood around Connie Mack Stadium were mostly African Americans, fleeing Jim Crow laws and racism in the South. White patrons complained that the neighborhood was undesirable or unattractive. What they meant was black. The Phillies had buses travel to the suburbs to get white fans into their ballpark, while refusing to sign black players and attract a more diverse crowd. Though it would have helped the Phillies on the field and financially, they refused to sign any black player until 1957 and did not consistently have black players on their squad until 1961. The team slipped back into mediocrity.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you.
In 1964, Beatlemania came to America. Lyndon Johnson was elected to a second term, and the United States found itself deeper entrenched in a war in Vietnam.
And I'll send all my loving to you.
That summer, in Philadelphia, riots broke out when two police officers accosted a woman named Odessa Bradford. She was in her car, arguing with her boyfriend, and had refused to move her vehicle out of the intersection at 23rd and Columbia. When the officers tried to physically remove Bradford from her car, a crowd gathered, and a man came to her aid. Both he and Bradford were arrested. Soon, rumors spread that a pregnant black woman had been beaten to death by white police officers.
There was a mayor who was an ex-police chief who really liked to have boots on the ground, and that really pushed up against the black population that was being basically, I believe, bullied and controlled, if you will, through fear. Didn't see the police dogs that you saw in Birmingham, Alabama, but I don't think we were that far off from having that kind of boots on your neck, if you will.
The Chat newspapers said the Phillies were through with the community in which they had lived for over 30 years. If the city government allowed the park to rot slowly, then the community had to assume that the powers that be were abandoning them too. Later, the Philadelphia Inquirer noted that 1 in 10 houses was vacant in the area around 21st and Lehigh. The baseball teams were leaving, the businesses were gone, and the population was declining.
Here you have a city that was just trying to hang on and trying to figure it out, and you still see the remnants of the failures, these abandoned factories with no windows, covered with graffiti and everything. And then you see in other parts of the city, you see this determination to come back.
In the summer of '64, everything seemed perfect for the Phillies. For more than 4 months, first place belonged to Gene Mock's men, and their relentless drive to the pennant was led by a 22-year-old rookie whom they called Richie Allen, the best young player to come into the National League in years.
In 1964, the Phillies called up their first black superstar. Though sports writers insisted on calling him Richie Allen, he preferred to go by Dick.
These were 2 home runs. One, if you'll recall, center field was 447 feet away. That's got to be well over 40, almost 50 feet beyond any center field fence in Major League Baseball today. And before when the field ended, there was this cutout, and in the cutout there was a batting cage that they would trot out, before the game. So Richie Allen hits this long fly to deep center field, and Bill Campbell's description was so vivid, and he was incredulous because who hit a ball over a fence that was 447 feet away, and then he was beside himself, and the ball lands right in that space where the batting cage is. Unbelievable.
So we're sitting amongst all the fans and everything, and I just remember my sister holding her ears and screaming because they announced my father's name in the lineup, and immediately it was the boos. I mean, it was heavy. It was like firework type thing, and I can still see her covering her ears screaming, "Stop booing my dad."
Allen was considered the most booed player in Philadelphia history by writers and fans. On the field, he got the nickname Crash because he wore a helmet to protect himself from debris thrown at him by fans. Coins, bolts, and bottles.
Dick Allen, he was a product of his time. He just didn't fit in well. He didn't play the role of the happy-go-lucky black man who would take anything or do anything.
When Phillies first baseman Frank Thomas made racial slurs toward Allen during batting practice, Allen swung at him, and Thomas hit Allen with a bat. 5 hours later, Thomas was on waivers, and Allen was ordered not to speak about the incident. White fans responded negatively and jeered Allen, throwing more racial epithets at him on the field and at the plate.
He kept a lot from us, meaning my family, my siblings and, my mother. But after he retired, years after he retired, he basically said he just never knew who to trust.
Allen was sent death threats and hate mail. His daughter was bullied at school, and his house was vandalized. The incidents kept Allen away from baseball outside of his job. He bought racehorses and fine clothing. By the late 60s, Allen was regularly late to practice and games, and got in a widely publicized barroom fight in 1967. Sometimes he failed to show up to the ballpark at all. "I was labeled an outlaw," Allen said, "and after a while, that's what I became."
I have a son who's the third, Richard Anthony Allen III, and this is how bad it is. He was brainwashed to want to play baseball. At one of his Little League games, I was told this, that a person said, "Oh, wow, he's lazy like his grandfather." Now, how do you pass that down to generations like that?
Dick lived through a hell in the minor leagues. Well, we signed him in Elmira. He went to Elmira. The second year he was in Magic Valley, which is out in the Hido. The third year he was in Williamsport. And the fourth year he was in Little Rock. He was the first black player in Little Rock. And he said one time he was walking the street, there's a soda machine there. So he went over and put his money to get a soda machine. Turned around, there's a gun in his head. What are you doing here, boy?
My father got hit in the eye. He squared around the bunt. He was hit in the eye. He said, I looked up and I woke up and he said, all I saw was white. He was in the hospital.
After the incident, Dick went home and was greeted at the airport by his brothers.
And one of Dick's oldest brothers' name was Coy, C-O-Y. And he was renting the house for Dick to live in and bought him a used car so he had something to get around to go to the ballpark and back and all that. And Coy said Hank was going to meet him at the airport. And Coy said, we're going to the ballpark. What do you mean? We're going to the ballpark, we're in a batting practice. So Coy was the pitcher, Dick was the batter, Hank was in the outfield. Coy's first pitch was at Dick's head, and down he went. And he said, son, if you don't want to be tough and stuff it and hang in about this or something like that, Mom has dinner waiting for you at home tonight and I'll be glad to take you home. Dick said, no, we're going to do it. The next pitch, right up there again. Down he went, and he got back up again.
My Uncle Sonny wanted to make sure that he wasn't afraid of the baseball. So he threw at him. He said, because if you're scared, you're not going to make it.
Allen endured more abuse in a few short years than most athletes do in an entire lifetime. Yet, he was not an easy player to manage. He missed practices regularly, and sometimes even full games.
Dick Allen drove me nuts sometimes because he created, my headache. We're going on the road, and I'm not going on a trip. I'm going to go home and rest. I'm driving by 30th Street train station. Dick Allen didn't show up for the airplane today for the trip to St. Louis. And okay, here we go again. But in his book, he wrote that his dad was a rebel, and I saw some of that in Dick. But I think he was misunderstood, too.
Phillies owner Bob Carpenter protected Allen. When manager Gene Mack gave Carpenter an ultimatum after missed practices, he chose to fire Mack rather than trade his superstar. Allen was fined, but he never paid. When Carpenter insisted he name a charity to contribute to, Allen refused, and Carpenter donated to the Police Athletic League himself. In October 1969, the Phillies traded Allen to the Cardinals for Curt Flood. Flood refused to report to Philadelphia, regarding the town as a hotbed for racism. Instead, Flood sought to fight the century-old reserve clause that bound players to a single team for life. He took his case to the Supreme Court, and won, never playing a game in a Phillies uniform. These strains brought all of the problems of the Phillies organization into the open. Racism, bad communication, poor management, disaffected players, mediocre performance, and low attendance. Sandy Grady, an elder statesman of Philadelphia sports media, reported that Connie Mack Stadium had, quote, more arguments per square foot than Belfast.
Will Chamberlain in 1962 for the Philadelphia Warriors scored 100 points in a game. The attendance at Hershey Park Arena, 4,000 fans, something like that. You would think 300,000 fans were there because people would tell you months and years later that they were there to witness it. Everybody was telling, or so it seemed, they were telling me that they had tickets to the World Series.
Powered by rookie Dick Allen and future Hall of Famer and Kentucky Senator Jim Bunning in 1964, it seemed the Phillies had emerged from the gutter to crown themselves National League champions. With 12 games remaining, the Phillies were 6.5 games clear in first place. And in those days, the first place team in the National League went directly to the World Series. On September 21st, the Phillies began a 7-game homestand against the Cincinnati Reds and Milwaukee Braves. A sweep of Cincinnati would win the pennant.
In the 6th inning of a scoreless tie game, Reds hitter Chico Ruiz laced a single to right field. The next batter followed with a hit, and Ruiz ran to third base. When Frank Robinson, the Reds' best hitter, stepped to the plate, Ruiz broke for home. Ruiz made the difference, and the Phillies lost 1-0.
That play broke our humps, said Allen.
Gene Mack panicked and he started pitching Jim Bunning and Chris Short, who were his two aces, on short rest, and the team just plummeted. And I think they maybe won their last couple of games of the year, but by then it was too late.
But Thomas doesn't come through this time as he hits a dribbler back to the box, and Marichal runs over to retire Frank and the Phillies. The Giants win this close one 4-3.
The Phillies would lose 10 straight and miss the World Series by 1 game.
It was like watching someone drown,
said Phillies manager Gene Mack.
So it had a devastating, and it's still people remember it really, really bad, and they'll talk about this year as though, well, it's not that unusual. Look what happened to the Phillies in '64, and some people will say, well, what happened to the Phillies? And you don't want to bring it up because it's not a good memory. It's not a good memory.
By 1965, the image of Connie Mack epitomized how the city government had abandoned North Philadelphia. In his eponymous Parks and Rec Center, Mack's statue held court over a pile of trash, litter, and broken bottles. The A's had left. The Phillies were in the process of leaving for a new stadium in South Philadelphia, and North Philly was being abandoned by residents and its ball clubs alike. The Phillies had planned to move into brand new Veterans Stadium in South Philadelphia by 1970. That got pushed back to mid-season, before the ball club finally acknowledged it would be ready for opening day 1971. In 1970, rookie Larry Boa took his first trip to Philadelphia and Connie Mack Stadium.
All I remember at Connie Mack was the very first day. There were two things that happened. I got out of the car. It was a day game, and these guys came up and says, "Hey, do you want us to watch your car?" And I went, "What?" It happened to be Darren Johnson who was there, and he says, "You better pay these guys, because if you don't, there's a good chance if you come out, your tires on your car will be gone or slashed." So obviously I had no idea what that was all about, so I gave him some money. And the next thing is I went into the stadium, and the guy, the guard at Connie Mack says, "Can I see your ID?" And I said, "I'm a player." And he goes, "Yeah, so am I." You know, he thought I was just trying to sneak in, so I had to pull out my driver's license and all that. And he goes, "Oh, okay, sorry." He says, "I thought you were a little bit bigger than that." But
on opening day 1970, Sandy Grady wrote about the team's efforts to have one final send-off for the stadium.
This was a day when Connie Mack Stadium should have been trapped in amber, a festival out of the past, and nuts to that futuristic mudhole in South Philly.
But, Grady added,
how many picnics can you have in a haunted house?
That season, parents and grandparents brought their progeny to the old altar where they had once prayed to the baseball gods. They remembered Eddie Collins and Home Run Baker. They remembered Jimmy Fox and Lefty Grove and Robin Roberts. They remembered how residents used to sell seats on the roofs for ball games, and how that all ended when Spite Wall went up. And they remembered the man whose name their church bore. This was Connie Mack's stadium. On the final day of the final game, then Vice President of Business Operations Bill Giles organized Farewell to Connie Mack Stadium Day. Employees wore old-fashioned clothes, concessions sold peanuts for a nickel, and a penny farthing bicycle group performed. At the penultimate game, the Phillies drew just over 1,100 fans. The next night, nearly 30 times that number came to say farewell. But few came for the ball game. They arrived with hammers and saws, crowbars and screwdrivers, anything that might help them take a piece of the stadium home. Women, children, and well-dressed gentlemen turned Connie Mack Stadium into a demolition site, even while the ball game was still going.
And about the fifth inning, I mean, you just heard, it sounded like a construction area. People were, matter of fact, there was one guy, I'm thinking, he must have been through this before. He was actually selling crowbars. Gene Mack was managing Milwaukee at the time, or Montreal, excuse me. And he talked to the umpire, said, because they were going to forfeit the game. He said, "I don't think you should do that, because the move that these fans are in right now, they wouldn't take too kindly for a forfeit of that game."
As soon as Phillies catcher Tim McCarver scored the winning run in the 10th inning, fans stormed the field. While Bill Giles screamed from the press box above, nearly 36 fans had their heads bashed with slats of wood during a melee over souvenirs in center field.
But they stormed the field. Players were running to the dugout to get off the field. They were out at home plate digging it up. They ripped the wall off in left field, the billboards, and took second base. I remember seeing a guy carry a toilet seat around his neck out of the ballpark. Yeah. They came with all kinds of equipment, hammers, straws, hammers and screwdrivers and stuff. Bill, we found a bunch of seat slats underneath the stadium someplace. And they were there in case the wooden seat broke, and they put it back on. So Bill came up with the idea that we would give them out till we run out of them, whatever, the 4,000 or something like that. And he put a label on each one of these. It's the last game of Connie Mack Stadium, the date and all that. Well, they used that as a weapon. And about the seventh inning, you heard the boom, 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 the beating on the seat slats on the seats. It was wild. I swear the press box was shaking.
And so I listened on the radio, and I would say as the innings went, and I believe they may have given out pieces of the seats to seat slats maybe to fans. So the fans start banging these slats, 7th inning, 8th inning, whatever. And then after the game was over, the vivid descriptions of fans just running over the field. There was a part of me that really lamented that and felt badly about that, because this was something that extended back to my childhood. These were my earliest sports memories, and now they were all sitting there in twisted metal and broken wood.
Earlier that night, during the peaceful hours before the game, former light heavyweight champion Bob Montgomery walked around the hallowed ground of the infield. He stopped at each base, as if to commune with the sporting deities who had watched over the building for more than 6 decades. Montgomery, who had won several fights during events at the park, lamented, "I just wanted to say, so long."
There are those who've abandoned neighborhoods and left them to decay. God has told us to go in and build. We want to make a positive impact on our city.
God has given us 12 acres of inner city land, blighted, desolate, abandoned.
Out of the dust shall rise Deliverance Village, a village of hope, a witness to the world as God can make joy from sorrow, beauty from ashes.
We're building. Oh, yes, we are building to the glory of God, bringing into reality a way of deliverance for thousands of men and women everywhere. Today, let it be your time of deliverance.
I remember back in the 48, 49, before we used to come to Shy Park, before it was Connie Mack, and we'd watch athletics, and we could, sometimes the kids it'd be like a double header, or the Phillies would play after the athletics or vice versa, and kids would hide in the bathroom, and then when the next game came on, they'd go out and watch the Phillies or the Athletic.
Well, I was a young boy. I think I was under 12 years old when I first went to Connie Mack Stadium here. And me and a lot of my friends used to come and sat in the bleachers. I think one of the most memorable things I remember is after the game, jumping over the fence and running on the field.
That was a day when you saw lots of people. The crowds were coming in. Baseball was the thing, you know. The Philadelphia Phillies and the Brooklyn Dodgers and and all those other teams came through here, and you saw, what's his name, Jackie Robinson played here. A lot of famous things happened right here in Philadelphia.
It changed. It changed a whole lot. It really, it seemed more. It almost seemed like the suburbs when we came in, first came in. Now it's more, urban. Because like I say, all the factories are gone and everything. People don't work. You see abandoned houses and different things now that you didn't see back then, and it was more diverse. Far as racially, it was more diverse back then too when we first moved there.
Robin Roberts, I became close with him when I was in PR. We did alumni weekends and all that. He and his wife went back to see where Connie Mack Stadium was. The church is there now. He walks in this church, it's empty, and he's trying to find out where might the pitching mound be here. A security guard saw him and says, "Sir, you can't be in here. Get out." An older gentleman was cleaning up. He says, "No, that's Mr. Roberts. He's allowed in here."
And my mom got tickets to a doubleheader at Connie Mack. It was Dodgers, Phillies, Jim Bunning, and Chris Short against Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax. So that's 3 Hall of Famers, right? And she said that she was going to take my brother because he was a boy. I never, ever, 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 ever let her forget that.
Well, my memory, and when I talk to people, is the same as everybody's memory. It's just, they were just enamored by the green grass. You just walked up and you just saw the whole playing field. And what was strange at that particular time, you just watched the game. It's not like going to Citizens Bank Park and you have this, you have that, you have all the bells and whistles. But when you went to Connie Mack Stadium, you went to Connie Mack Stadium to watch the game.
I just remember walking into the stadium, and like a lot of kids, even today with modern stadiums, you hear the PA, you hear the buzz of the crowd, you look at the emerald green grass and you say to yourself, wow, this is a sensory experience that I will never forget.
Well, at Connie Mack Stadium, the seats were close to the field. You faced the field. It was a ballpark. It wasn't a stadium. And the capacity was 34,000, something like that. It was a baseball game.